15 years of my life sat in the walls of Strathmore Analytics. Every late night, every crisis averted, every system I had patched together, it all lived here, in this Manhattan glass tower. That morning, I was summoned to the executive boardroom. The carpet smelled of new money, the kind of success I had built but was never invited to enjoy. Marcus Halden, our CEO, stood at the front, laser pointer in hand, as the screen filled with slides outlining a multi-million-dollar healthcare contract. My chest tightened. The models, the projections, the implementation timeline, they were mine. Word for word, formula for formula. I recognized my fingerprints on every page. Then came the slip. For a fraction of a second, the projector displayed Marcus's desktop. And there it was, an internal email. His words glared in bold Clara's raw data, but I polished it into gold. The room chuckled politely as he fumbled back to the presentation, pretending nothing had happened. A senior partner clapped him on the back. Brilliant work, Marcus. I sat perfectly still, lips pressed into a smile that burned my cheeks, while inside something sharp twisted. When the meeting ended, voices buzzed about upcoming promotions. My pulse quickened. Maybe finally my turn. I had given them 15 years. Surely this was the moment recognition arrived. Instead, Marcus called me into his office. His desk gleamed, spotless, while mine was always buried in work. He leaned back, lips curved into that polished smirk I had come to despise. Clara, you've done good work here, but 15 years is a long run. We're moving in a younger direction. You're replaceable. The word sliced through me. Replaceable. As if all those years were nothing more than worn-out furniture to be discarded. He didn't even give me the courtesy of finishing the sentence before security appeared at the door. A box was shoved into my arms, filled with my life reduced to a coffee mug, a photo frame, and scattered notes. I walked through the lobby as if in a fog, each step heavier than the last. My idea had won them millions, yet I was shoved out the door like a broken chair. That night, back in my apartment in Queens, I stared at the box on my kitchen table. Anger and disbelief tangled inside me, already pulling me toward what would come next. Back in Queens, the skyline shimmered beyond my window like a cruel joke. For years, it had been a beacon, the reason I stayed late, the view I glimpsed at dawn as I left the office after pulling another all-nighter. Now it only mocked me. I set the box on the counter and let the silence close in. Images crowded my mind, missed birthdays, unanswered calls. The Christmas Eve I spent rewriting a broken dashboard while my family gathered without me. I remembered curling up on a lobby chair, shivering under a blazer, just to keep a client rollout alive. Those sacrifices had been bricks in the tower that Marcus now stood atop, smiling while I was shoved into the street. Luciana insisted on meeting me that weekend. We sat in a narrow Brooklyn diner, the kind with sticky menus and bottomless coffee. I spilled it all, the stolen credit, the smirk, the word replaceable echoing in my skull. My voice cracked as I said, I gave them everything. What do I have left? She didn't comfort me. Instead, she leaned forward, dark eyes sharp. You gave them everything, and they gave you nothing. Stop begging for their approval. They decided your value years ago. I shook my head. I don't have another job. I don't even know where to start. Luciana stirred her coffee, lips tightening. That's the sunk cost fallacy. Clara, don't cling to a mistake just because you've spent years making it. Her words followed me home. I paced my apartment like a caged animal, pulling old notebooks from shelves, flipping through pages of hand-drawn models and formulas. Each one was proof of what I had built, what Strathmore had leaned on me to create. The more I read, the more a thought hardened. I knew this company better than anyone. Every shortcut, every patch, every fragile system, my fingerprints were on them all. I knew where the cracks lay buried, and I began to wonder what would happen if those cracks were ever brought into the light. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a stack of notebooks beside me. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound as I began typing. If Marcus thought I was replaceable, I would prove just how wrong he was, not to him, but to myself. I started with the obvious, the clients. I listed each account I had nurtured personally, the ones who called my cell phone instead of the Strathmore support line, Heal Space Medical, Meridian Diagnostics, and especially MedVista Health. Their CIO trusted me because I had been the one to pull their pilot out of free fall when Strathmore's implementation nearly collapsed. Those relationships belonged to me, not the firm. Next came the systems. The official reporting platforms were riddled with gaps I had quietly patched for years. Without my workarounds, dashboards would fail, numbers would skew, and clients would see through the polished facade. I documented every fix, every script, every invisible layer holding the machinery together. Finally, the contracts. Some were propped up by smoke and mirrors. MedVista's pilot stood out the most. On paper, it looked like a success story. In reality, the data pipelines were fragile, brittle as glass. If an auditor ever peeled back the layers, Strathmore could face penalties they weren't prepared for. I saved every piece of evidence into encrypted files, my own insurance policy. When my head throbbed from staring at spreadsheets, I pulled on running shoes and jogged along the East River. The dawn air was sharp, carrying the tang of salt and steel. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to catch a train or answer a late-night call. Each step loosened something inside me. I wasn't their safety net anymore. I belonged to no one's clock. But as I slowed near the railing and watched the water churn against the pylons, the weight of my files pressed at the back of my mind. I had mapped the fault lines, every crack waiting to split open. The question was no longer whether they existed. It was what I planned to do with them. A few weeks after my dismissal, an invitation slid into my inbox farewell drinks at a midtown bar. The irony wasn't lost on me. Most of them still believed I had left voluntarily, that I had chosen to pursue new opportunities. I almost deleted it, but curiosity tugged at me. If nothing else, it would give me a chance to listen. The bar glowed with warm light and laughter spilled out onto the sidewalk. I walked in with my best corporate smile, shaking hands, offering hugs, congratulating the newly promoted. I clinked glasses with people who had once leaned on me during crises but now avoided mentioning my exit. My face stayed composed, but behind the mask, I was watching. Theo Branson, the newest golden boy, was already on his third whiskey. He leaned too close, his breath heavy with alcohol, and bragged loud enough for half the bar to hear. Marcus is a genius. He knows how to make the numbers dance. Inflate here, polish there, clients eat it up. He laughed, proud of himself for revealing the firm's dirty secrets. I slipped my phone out and pressed record, capturing every careless word. The corruption ran deeper than I had imagined. Later that night, back in my apartment, I spread my notebooks across the table and began outlining a plan. First, build financial independence. Second, establish my own firm, something lean, something honest. Third, reach out to dissatisfied clients, not by poaching, but by offering them the help they'd never truly received. And finally, keep the evidence I'd gathered as my shield. The next morning, I updated my LinkedIn to a vague consultant title, planting seeds without revealing my direction. Then I reached out quietly to Lorraine, the CIO at MedVista Health, over coffee in a quiet Brooklyn cafe. She lowered her voice and confessed, "Your old firm promised fixes that never came. Sometimes I think you were the only one who knew what was happening." Her words stayed with me long after the coffee cooled, a flicker of possibility I hadn't dared let myself imagine. The headlines came across my phone one morning like a slap. Strathmore Analytics announces record profits from healthcare division. I scrolled through the article, reading Marcus's quotes about cutting-edge solutions and bulletproof systems. My stomach turned. The very project he was bragging about was one I had patched together on sleepless nights. Beneath the polish, It was fragile, brittle, one wrong keystroke away from collapse. Later that week, an old colleague reached out, someone who still spoke in whispers when the firm's name came up. Over coffee, they leaned in close and murmured, "They're covering up issues with the Halverson insurance rollout. If regulators dig too deep, they're finished." I nodded, saying little, but inside I felt the files in my possession pulse with weight. I had kept every report, every discrepancy. If I wanted to, I could burn them down in an instant, but I wasn't ready, not yet. One evening, I met Luciana at a jazz cafe in Harlem, the kind of place where the saxophone curled through the air like smoke. I told her about Marcus's lies, about Halverson, about how much evidence I was sitting on. She didn't smile or sympathize. She looked at me steadily and asked, "Are you building something new, or just nursing old wounds?" Her words stung because they were true. Revenge had become my shadow, but it wasn't enough. I wanted something bigger, something that would prove I wasn't just a discarded piece of furniture in Marcus's office. That night, back in my apartment, I sat at my laptop until dawn. With a single click, I registered a business name, Meridian Insight Partners. Just letters on a state website. Yet when I saw them together on the screen, something shifted in me. For the first time since I carried that box out of Strathmore, I felt the outline of a future that was mine alone. The lease was nothing glamorous, just a corner in a co-working space downtown, where the paint peeled near the windows and the Wi-Fi sputtered if too many people logged on. Still, when I slid the keycard across the reader and stepped inside, it felt like a beginning. I bought a second-hand desk from a classified ad, borrowed Luciana's old laptop, and set it up with trembling hands. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Day after day, I sat at that desk, drafting proposals that no one had asked for, crafting case studies from memory, and sketching how Meridian Insight Partners could look if given the chance. I reached out discreetly to people I trusted, never with promises, never with pressure, just listening. If you ever need perspective outside the firm, I would say, I'm here. One morning, an email from Lorraine at Midvista arrived. Short, direct, let's meet formally. We might need independent help. It wasn't a contract, not yet, but my hands shook as I read it. Validation, even in that small form, lit something inside me. Meanwhile, word trickled back from Strathmore through colleagues who still cared enough to whisper, deadlines missed, staff leaving, frantic emails trying to recreate systems they didn't understand, and Marcus, always Marcus, standing in front of cameras insisting that I had been average, not leadership material. I laughed quietly to myself. His denial was fuel. Every syllable adding fire to the resolve that kept me working late into the night. I poured what little savings I had into building a brand. I designed templates, wrote a mission statement, even fiddled with colors until my eyes ached. One night, just past midnight, the new logo appeared on my laptop screen in bold lines and clean lettering. Meridian Insight. I stared at it for a long time. The glow painting my apartment walls. For years, I had built someone else's empire in silence. Now, even if it was fragile and small, this one carried my name. And for the first time, it felt like enough to step forward. It didn't take long for the cracks I had mapped to widen. At Strathmore headquarters, dashboards began to break, numbers refused to reconcile, and reports delivered to clients came back riddled with errors. For years, my fixes had been invisible scaffolding. Without me, the facade sagged and splintered. I heard from a sympathetic colleague that an emergency project meeting had devolved into shouting. No one could replicate the work I had done. They had my files, but not my instincts. What they didn't understand was that those systems had been held together by memory as much as logic. Marcus, unwilling to admit failure, went on the offensive. He told partners and staff that I had sabotaged the company before leaving. The lie spread quickly, warped into superstition. Some whispered I had cursed the systems on my way out, as if code could carry vengeance in its lines. I smiled grimly at the absurdity truth had a way of making its own chaos without any help from me. Then came the call from Lorraine. Her voice was steady, but edged with frustration. "Clara, we're considering terminating our contract with Strathmore. We can't trust their reporting anymore. Can you step in?" I paused, weighing the risk. But I knew my rights. In all my years at Strathmore, they had never bothered to have me sign a non-compete. Marcus's arrogance had left the door wide open. "I can," I said carefully, "but only if it's entirely above board. No conflict, no shadows." Within weeks, MedVista Health signed with Meridian Insight, my first official contract. When I sent the invoice, the numbers startled me. It was more than I had earned in months of corporate grind. And for once, every dollar was mine, tied to my name, my work, my vision. As I sat in my modest office, the ink drying on that contract, I realized the first domino had tipped. One client had chosen me over the giant I once served, and the sound of that collapse echoed louder than any insult Marcus had ever thrown my way. The news broke like thunder. Trade journals splashed headlines about Strathmore's mishandling of the Halverson insurance rollout. The same flaw I had cataloged months earlier. Auditors had dug beneath the polished reports and uncovered the truth-manipulated metrics. Faulty dashboards, promises built on sand, lawsuits loomed. Marcus went on television to sneer that I had been the architect of the problems, a bitter ex-employee sabotaging from the shadows. But this time, the partners didn't clap politely. They began whispering to each other, questioning his leadership, wondering how one woman's absence had shaken the firm to its foundation. While Strathmore spiraled, I was quietly building. I hired my first assistant, Anya Navarro, a brilliant analyst I'd once seen overlooked by a different firm's old boys club. She arrived with sleeves rolled up, eager to prove herself. And together we worked late nights delivering clean, reliable solutions Strathmore could no longer manage. Clients noticed the difference immediately. One evening, after wrapping up a proposal, I stopped by a midtown hotel lounge for a quick drink. I hadn't planned to linger, but then I heard familiar voices at the bar. Two ex-colleagues leaned in close, their tones low but urgent. The board's furious. One muttered, "They're talking about investigating Marcus." My pulse quickened. In my files, tucked away safely, I held proof that could finish him. Every inflated report, every doctored spreadsheet, every email where he had dismissed my warnings. I slipped out before they noticed me, the city air sharp against my face. But as I walked, I knew I wouldn't use it. I didn't need to. The truth was rising on its own, and Marcus was choking on it without my hand at his throat. My energy belonged to my clients, to Meridian Insight, to building something untainted by their rot. The spotlight was turning, and for once, I didn't have to chase it. It was finding me. And soon, the very people who had once treated me as replaceable would come looking for the woman they thought they could discard. The sedan was sleek, black, and out of place on my block. I watched from the window of my modest office as the back door opened and Vernon Hale, chairman of Strathmore's board, stepped out. His tailored suit and silver cufflinks looked almost theatrical against the cracked pavement of downtown. He didn't wait to be announced, just walked in, scanning the small space with polite curiosity before settling across from me. "Clara," he said with a practiced smile, "we made a mistake." I said nothing. He cleared his throat and pressed on. "Marcus is finished. The lawsuits, the investigations, he's destroyed our reputation. The board is ready to remove him, and we need stability. We need you." The words hung between us like a mirage. He continued, each promise heavier than the last, an equity stake, freedom to name my terms, and a direct path to becoming CEO. I listened, hands folded, as if the offer wasn't shaking something deep inside me. For a moment, I let myself imagine it walking back into that glass tower, sitting behind Marcus's mahogany desk, commanding the floor that once pushed me out with a cardboard box. The hunger for recognition stirred, sharp and undeniable. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw Anya through the glass wall, headphones in, tapping at her keyboard while humming softly to the music only she could hear. Our office was small, but it was ours. Clients called me directly, not because they had to, but because they trusted me. No masks, no layers of politics, no lies. I looked back at Vernon, his offer still glistening in the air like bait. For the first time in 15 years, I realized I already had what they could never give me: ownership, freedom, respect. I thanked him for coming, my voice calm, even gentle. His eyes flickered with surprise, but I held his gaze steady, already knowing the choice I would make when the words finally left my mouth. I folded my hands on the desk and met Vernon's expectant eyes. He was waiting for me to lunge at the throne he dangled in front of me. But instead, I smiled. "I appreciate it," I said evenly, "but I've moved on." The silence that followed was almost theatrical. He blinked once, twice, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. Then came the stunned pause of a man unused to being refused. I walked him to the door myself, shaking his hand with steady grace. By the end of that month, Marcus was ousted, his name whispered with ridicule in trade circles. But I never went back. Not for money, not for power, not even for vindication. Life moved forward. Meridian Insight expanded faster than I could have imagined. Within months, we were 12 strong. MedVista flourished under systems that actually worked. Halverson, once a liability, signed with us and never looked back. Former Strathmore staff trickled into my office one by one. Anya's energy drew them, and my promise of honesty kept them. Even their former HR head, weary of Marcus's games, joined us to build a culture that valued people as much as profit. Some evenings I stayed late, not out of obligation, but out of choice. I would stand at the window, looking out across the East River as the lights scattered across the water. 15 years they told me I was replaceable. 15 years of being reminded that no matter what I built, it could be dismissed with a smirk. And yet, here I was, watching their empire shrink while mine quietly grew. It turns out, they were the ones no one needed. I thought back to the day I walked out with a box in my arms and a weight in my chest. That was the day I thought I had lost everything. I hadn't realized it was the day I'd been set free. Sometimes revenge isn't about going back stronger, it's about never going back at all. And the greatest discovery of my life was that the power I sought from them had been mine all along.